Good afternoon, dear audience. Today we will continue the list of civilization diseases in the frame of the hot topics of human nutrition. As we have learned the main topics, and we are over the obesity and T2 diabetes, atherosclerosis, the iron deficiency, anemia, formation of tumor and cancer, we arrived to the last member of the metabolic syndrome, of the namely the high blood pressure, and we will continue with the bone health and the influence of the diet and the pH and acid-base balance of the organism. The metabolic syndrome is a combination of conditions that raises the risk of diseases like the T2 diabetes, the atherosclerosis, together with the consequence as heart disease, a heart attack, and a stroke. Midsection obesity with a waistline more than 90 centimeter for women and 100 centimeter for men is a risk signal. The high density lipoprotein below 40-50 milligram per deciliter is also a alarming signal. And the blood pressure over 130 per 85 systole, diastole millimeter mercury. Triglyceride level over 150 milligram per 100 milliliter, and a fasting blood glucose level greater than 5.5 millimole per liter. We will concentrate now on the hypertension, and you have to see the function of renin-angiotensin system. These cells, this tissue is related to the arteria renalis, and they can produce the renin angiotensin, which will increase the blood pressure in case of necessity. So in case of lower blood circulation, they will shrunken the vessels, and they will increase the hypertension. Yes, this is the normal physiological function, but what happens if there is a alarm reaction called cannon alarm reaction, dominated by noradrenaline and adrenaline, or a long-lasting stress described first by János Seje with the dominance of cortisol and hydrocortisone. They also will increase the blood pressure. And here comes the influence of the feeding and the influence of the minerals in the food. The main problem, a main signal for the renin-angiotensin system is the ratio of the potassium to sodium in the food. And from this respect, we have to know that the plant has a high potassium concentration, but the animal body, consequently the food of animal origin, is very high in sodium but very low in potassium. By this way, the predominant intake of food of animal origin will give a signal to the renin-angiotensin system to increase the blood pressure. Beside these factors, the stress and the sodium to potassium ratio of the food, we also know predisposing factors like the alcohol consumption, which itself may increase the blood pressure, the smoking with its vascular effect also increase the hypertension, and only to mention lack of time that some types of physical activity and, for example, the Kundalini yoga may also a factor in the hypertension. It is one of the most important diseases, and this is why you can find leaflets. For example, here what I show you that 4 facts you need know about stroke prevention, or you can see how we can avoid a stroke, and the main proposal are you have to screen regularly your carotid artery and abdominal aortic aneurysm by means of ultrasound. At the same time, of course, that the peripheral arterial disease should be prevented, and the osteoporosis risk assessment is also related to this complex question. Later on we will see the osteoporosis just now. It's interesting that in the United States, if you buy white potatoes, you can see that a high potassium food, it is from our position concerning the high blood pressure, it's very advantageous. But in some cases, in some heart diseases may be too high, but for us, from this respect, is extremely good. So high salt to avoid, because how can we maintain the good potassium to sodium ratio? First of all, we have to decrease the sodium intake and increase the potassium intake. High salt should be avoided, and maximum daily intake from common salt would be 7 gram. 7 gram. It's not too high. Be careful. So high salt to avoid all sorts of the salts. Potato chips, salted nuts, which are conservated by salt. Smoked or cured meats and fish. Salted butter and margarine. Frozen dinners, canned vegetables, prepared pasta, sauces, and salsa, and practically all the salad dressings and marinades, the soy sauce, all sorts of the cheeses, packaged rice and packaged potato and pasta mixes, canned soup, instant noodles, ketchup and mustard, and finally pudding and cake mixes. So this is what we have to avoid. Of course, we have to avoid the individual salting process during the meal. And the other component, how to eat more potassium by eating more fruits and vegetables like bananas, dates, orange, grapefruit, cantaloupe, and beans and lentils, mushrooms, tomatoes, oat bran, and yogurt. I have put together a salt mixture which compensate a little bit the effect of sodium. It consists of 1/3 of sodium chloride, 1/3 of potassium chloride, and 1/3 of magnesium citrate to improve the function of the heart muscle. It has a little bit different taste, but within 2-3 days you can accustom to it. And by this way you can use a little bit more salt than the minimum value of this 7 gram common salt. So this was the dietary aspects of the high blood pressure, and now we will move to the next and related civilization disease, namely the osteoporosis. On this picture you can see the main consequences, the bone fractures in the arm and the hip and the pelvic area, and the consequences, and we have to see that the osteoporosis, according to the official definition of the OECD, is a progressive systemic skeletal disease which is characterized by the low bone density mass and microarchitectural deterioration of bone tissue, and a consequent increase in bone fragility and susceptibility to fracture. End of the citation. The study which are used partly as a background material was organized by the European Community and deal with the most commonly occurrence of the osteoporosis in postmenopausal women and also in the old age senile osteoporosis. So this is the definition. In a plain English, osteoporosis is a dilution of the bone, a parallel and proportional decrease of the organic and unorganic material of the skeletal system. Rounded, 10% of the European population, especially females, are touched by this problem. And of course that all the physiological role of the bone is reduced, not only the skeleton building function, but also the protection of the brain, the storage function of the minerals, and as a function of a buffer in acid-base balance, in maintaining the acid-base balance. So all this will be disturbed in the osteoporosis. What is the extent of the osteoporosis? You can see that the severe form of the osteoporosis, namely the fractures, are very frequent. In a word statistics, every third second you have a fracture, it means close to 8.9 million fractures per year. And after that, some and most of the people will lose the independence, and also we have unfortunately high mortality rate related to this event. Factors influencing the bone metabolism may be divided into exogenous and endogenous factors. Endogenous related to the organism, and they are related to the lung, kidney, liver, and parathyroid gland function. The related hormones are the parathyroid hormone, the calcitonin, and the active vitamin D called calcitriol. They counteract each other, making a complex system of organization and regulation. Factors influencing the bone metabolism are partly exogenous. It means that outside of the organism, and the first is the food. The food may influence the bone metabolism by influencing the acid-base balance of the organism. In other words, the cation and ion balance of the food mixture, or the Prel value of the food mixture. See later. The absolute calcium concentration of the food, the vitamin D content, and as a new discoveries, the vitamin K level, and microelements like manganese and copper, which are also part of the bone structure. And as a adjuvant function, the vitamin C content. And last but not least, the phytoestrogens, the estrogens of some plants like the soybean, may also have a influence. So first, the absolute calcium concentration, and this is a very discussed field of science. The minimal daily intake is generally accepted between 1000 and 1500 milligram per person, but it is a result of a development, because the American recommended daily allowances some decades ago proposed only 700 milligram per person. Professor Joseph Marcus from the Veterinary University Budapest in the 17th and 18th developed a recommendation of 3000 milligram per kilogram. To compare with the average intake in Europe is no more than 850 milligram per day, so this is absolutely lower even to the minimal daily intake. It was detected in the statistics that in case of patients with broken proximal femur had less than 600 milligram per day intake. And the higher intake, higher than 1000 milligram, regularly improves bone density and decreases risk of fracture. It is very important to emphasize for the females in perimenopause, where in this time the calcium supplementation moderates the bone losses of spine, the backbone. It's true that we will see that many other factors are contributing, but the first factor is the calcium intake. We have one side effect with the higher calcium intake, namely constipation may occur in some people, so you have to work again. Okay, how can we improve the calcium intake? We can improve the calcium intake by milk product. You see that they are relatively high in calcium. For example, good cheese may contain approximately 800 milligram calcium per 100 gram. So this is the daily intake. Or you see that the whole milk, if you drink a liter of whole milk, this is also sufficient. But vegetables are also excellent, like the cabbage, turnip cabbage, the celery, the leek, the sweet roar, the broccoli, parsley are with a relatively high calcium intake, calcium concentration. To add some to the calcium content of milk products, we have to emphasize that they are easy to absorb. They have a good availability because the calcium is binded to milk protein, and the boiling, pasteurization do not influence the availability. The only problem may be the lactose intolerance, but in case use yogurt and cheese to cover the calcium requirement. What is the characterization of the plants? The foods of plant origin high in calcium are at the same time high in ballast. In some case it's very good because the recommended dietary fiber intake of approximately 7 gram, it's not easy to achieve. This indigestible and or organic matter may improve the digestion at the same time. So this is not so bad. But the calcium may occur in form of calcium oxalate, and this may predisposing factor for urinary alkali. And what about the mineral waters? They are also excellent. Here you see some Hungarian mineral waters, but internationally you can find similar. So you see that they are real, real calcium sources. But what foods and drink should be avoided which are harmful to the bone health, which may facilitate the mobilization of the bones? The low calcium, high phosphate foods like the meat, sausages, ham and other meat products are not beneficial. And also the drinks of high acid and phosphate level like the Coke, Coca-Cola are also not beneficial. What about the vitamin D's? Because you see that this is a family and we need the final product, the activated vitamin D. But now we concentrate to the vitamin D deficiency, which will cause a decrease in the intestinal calcium absorption because less calcium binding protein is available in the gut wall. Consequently, the blood calcium level falls, drops, and this is detected by the parathyroid gland, and the parathyroid gland will increase the parathormone secretion. And the parathormone, in its turn, will will mobilize the calcium from the bones, and this is equal to osteoporosis. So the vitamin D requirement to maintain an even vitamin D level, we have to take 600 international unit, which is equivalent to 15 microgram vitamin D daily. In the statistics, it was found that a low concentration vitamin D in the blood may be found in the European population. For example, in a German survey, 40% of the females and 30% of the males have vitamin D deficiency based on this 40 nanomole per liter vitamin D in the serum. If you go to your yearly big blood labor analysis, you can ask for vitamin D analysis too. I have to add that today it was found that the vitamin D is a powerful immunostimulant agent, and this is the reason that in the time of the pandemic it is proposed even more than this minimum daily intake, which is against the osteoporosis. Where can we get vitamin D? The human organism has an endogenous synthesis in the skin and through the ultraviolet light. The activation of this provitamin occurs in the liver and in the kidneys by receiving an hydroxyl group, and the end product is the 1,25 dihydrocholecalciferol or calcitriol. The intake by food is also possible. High vitamin D can be found in fish, mostly from sea fish, cold water fishes, in the egg, in the mushroom, and in the milk, in the good, healthy farmer milk. And the new discovery that the vitamin K, K1 is the phylloquinone, K2 the menaquinone, and the K3, the synthetic one, the menadione, are cofactors of vitamin K dependent carboxylase enzymes. And by this way, vitamin K has a function in the carboxylation of the matrix protein of the bone. You have this gamma carboxylated glutamine in the bones, and you have also the bone proteins like the osteocalcin, the matrix GLA protein, and sulfur protein. The osteocalcin, in its turn, is also known as bone gamma carboxyglutamic acid containing protein, which is a small 49 amino acid non-collagenous protein hormone, which can be found in the bone and participate in the calcium binding. They have a high affinity in binding the calcium ions in the bones. So this is also part of the bone maintenance and formation. So the vitamin K at the same time may also decrease the renal calcium excretion, contributing in conserving the calcium in the organism. It was also shown by trials that the osteocalcin quantity is in correlation with the risk of hip bone fracture. The less osteocalcin, the higher risk. And also the bone's density is in relation with the down carboxylated osteocalcin. And the risk of the bone fracture occurs if the daily vitamin K intake is less than 109 microgram. And altogether in those trials, a higher vitamin D, higher calcium, and higher vitamin K combination significantly improved the bone density of radius distalis. By the food, how can we get vitamin K? You see that the green plants are high in vitamin K, and what is available in the human nutrition are the parsley, the sage, like Simon and Garfunkel's song, Parsley and Sage, chive, onion, spinach, cabbage, leek, lentil, cauliflower, broccoli, and you can add the weed germ and also the plant oils in some cases. And as a factor, last factor are the phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens found in some plant are selective modulators of the estrogen receptors. Excellent representative is the genistein, which is an isoflavonoid, and among others can be found in soybean and alfalfa, green alfalfa. Daily 54 milligram genistein intake may prevent postmenopausal bone losses. How to reach this intake? We can find in the tofu and in the alfalfa, green alfalfa or green alfalfa sprout. The only contraindication is the danger of memory tumor, and the pro-indication may be a prevention of the prostate cancer. The food may influence the acid-base balance of the organism, and the acid burden of the food may be harmful. The metabolic and respiratory acidosis will cause bone losses. Many foods may stimulate the acid production. See later the Earth's alkalicity theory and the Prall number. And lastly, the protein intake as a part of the daily food. Too much animal protein intake may stimulate the renal calcium excretion. In extreme cases, secondary renal hyperparathyroidism may occur, rarely osteodystrophia fibrosa. It is well known as all meat syndrome in case of companion animals like the cats. But at elderly, the protein deficiency itself enhances the risk of bone fracture, So you have to get a good balance. The optimum daily amount should be set personally, which is only to say one rounded number, approximately 60 gram protein. And finally, the effect of consumer goods on osteoporosis. The coffee and the moderate alcohol consumption has been found as no risk factor. That's good news. In a Japanese trial, even the beer protected from osteoporosis. The big question is why, but you can give the answer based on the previously mentioned that the beer may contain phytoestrogens. The smoking may slightly increase the risk. But here you can see one proposal, calcium and vitamin D tablet for a daily use, may a little bit counterbalance a little bit of these harmful effects. And we will move to the mentioned topic, which is the benefits of alkaline diet, or about the pH of the foods. And we have to see an overview that the healthy food is on the left side and the fast food on the right side, with a yes and with a no, which reflect also my opinion. And also what is your choice, according to the Hungarian song by the Illich orchestra. What is your choice? The left side, which is absolutely healthy, or the right side, which is very tasty, but be careful. Why? Because I give you first an overview about the pH spectrum of the foods, where they push the acid-base balance of the organism, and you see that they are from the influence to the very acidic to the alkaline. Okay, we will see these circumstances. What is the pH first of all? What is the pH? The pH is a negative 10th logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration. This is a proton, a simple proton. It is a extremely tiny little proton, and which is present in nanomolar quantities in the blood as a proton. In case of pH 7, in a red blood cells, you can find 1 milliard sodium and only 30,000 or 0.003 thousand percentage of proton to counterbalance each other. This is similar, these two quantities, two concentrations, as the Earth to Sun distance. This is the number of the sodium, or the Budapest-New York distance. This is the number of protons. So these are the main player of the acid-base balance, and the other players are the minerals, the alkali and earth alkali mineral, the sodium, the potassium, the calcium, and the magnesium, you see, together with the hydrogen, the proton. And among others, they contribute in the regulation of the muscle nerve irritability. And in the alkalization and acidification of the tissues and the blood fluids. We can follow the muscle nerve irritability according to the George formula, where you have the sodium multiplied potassium divided by calcium and magnesium and proton ion concentration. And this is a constant number, and if the number change, the irritability will also change and will cause coma or conversions, etc., like the milk fever of the dairy cows or the puerperal eclampsy of the lactating bitches in the veterinary medicine, but it's occur also in human. Okay, and now we have to see a little bit closer the alkalizing and the neutral or the acidifying foods. You see that the previous picture was absolutely good, because you can see that the relatively neutral are the mineral waters, close to a little bit acidifying are the fish and the egg and the dairy product, but the fruit juices and meat and others are acidifying really. And right side you can see excellent members of the alkalizing foods like the fruits, banana, avocado, and the vegetables. But before that we have to see that how many minerals can be found in the human body. You can see here that in a decreasing concentration, calcium, phosphate, potassium, sodium, sulfur, chloride, and magnesium, and below this concentration, the iron and the traces in milligram per kilogram, the zinc, copper, manganese, iodine, selenium, and cobalt. And the total is 2.73%, which is for an average person of 70 kilogram is close to 2 kilograms of minerals. 2 kilograms of minerals, in oxidized form even more. Why we have to take minerals every day? Need for mineral intake is first because they needed in building and replacing of tissues. We need in them in regulatory functions, and the domesticated animals, the food-producing animals require minerals because they built in products like the bone, eggshell, and the milk, and the milk is extremely important because we will drink this mineral containing more or less milk. We have to overview the acid and sometimes alkaline building metabolic processes of the organism. The alkaline is in brackets because predominantly the processes are towards the acidification of the tissues and body fluids. First, the complete oxidation of carbohydrates and neutral fats will produce acid or potential acid, because the CO2 is an acid, a potential acid. Oxidation of the sulfur containing amino acids like the cysteine and methionine. Metabolism of the salt of organic acids and organic bases, the bone formation, oxidation of neutral lipids to organic acid in case of a fasting and ketosis, the ketoacidosis, the so-called beta hydroxy butyric acid, and the acetic and the acetone is produced, and they are acidic. Oxidation of neutral carbohydrates into organic acids during the anaerobe glycolysis and the production of lactacidosis, for example, in the muscles. And one alkaline building is a pathological one, is a rumen putrefaction, and which is physiological in all people, the postprandial alkaline wave, when in the stomach all the acid has been binded and neutralized by the ingested food. So you see that basically the processes will move the acid-base balance towards the acidic one. And the minerals will influence the acid-base balance, but the minerals which get into the cell will get in form of a salt, which is solved in water. So after the water solubility, they can get this into the cell content. And here you have three possibilities if there is a combination of a salt of strong acid and strong base will get a neutral, like the sodium hydroxide and acid chloride will give a common salt. This is neutral, the sodium chloride. A salt of strong acid and weak base will be acidic, like the ammonium chloride or the salt volatile. And the salt of weak acid and strong base will give a base, like the sodium bicarbonate or the potassium citrate. In the veterinary university of the 1920s, three scientists worked on this problem. Marek from the inner diseases, Wellman from the breeding and nutrition department, and Urbani from the chemical department, and they developed a system how the mineral content of the feed, because they worked with the animals, may influence the acid-base balance of the organism. And this is the so-called earth alkalicity theory. It means that the amount in the feed of the calcium oxide plus magnesium oxide minus phosphate pentoxide should be a positive number to improve the health and the growth of the animals. The younger the animal is, the more intensive is the metabolism. And the more intense metabolism will produce more acid or potential acids, which should be neutralized by the earth's components of the feed mixture. But you see that even in the adult animal, the production of the acids are higher than the base, therefore they also need more base intake, more calcium magnesium intake than phosphate. You have to put a question that why did they calculate with oxides? Okay, this was only a question of analytics, that they burnt the feed, they burnt the bones, and they solved in an acid, and in this way they could analyze the oxides and not the elements. But this is the same system. I give you only two pictures to extract from the original so-called Köstelek publication, which contains the list of the feedstuffs and the number of the calcium oxide, magnesium oxide, phosphate pentoxide, and the earth alkalicity for further calculation. This is only as a homage for them, and to see the modern for human developed similar theory. This is the potential renal acid load, which I've mentioned previously. This is a cation anion balance, in other words, but this is especially for human, because not only is used for the osteoporosis prevention, but also in case of kidney problems. You see that the phosphate and the protein mean a big acid load for the organism, for the kidneys, and the potassium, magnesium, calcium act as a base. Okay, so this is the human PRAL value of the food, expressed in form of milliequivalent per 100 gram, and the component are the protein in gram per day intake, phosphate, potassium, magnesium, calcium in milligram per day. And you see that the PRAL value is has a factor to get the milliequivalent protein multiplied phosphate minus the total amount of potassium, magnesium, and calcium, which are potential bases. And this is the inverse approach to the Earth's alkalicity, because this is a load for the kidneys. The smaller, the better the PRAL value is. Here you can see that the PRAL is a measure of the acid and base forming potential of foods and beverages, with negative values reflecting an excess of base forming potential, which is beneficial, and the positive values indicating an excess of acid forming potential, which is harmful, especially for the kidneys and for the skeletal system, which are alkalizing the organism. Interestingly enough, the meditation, the prayer, the inner peace, and the kindness and love have been found as a positive alkalizing agent by decreasing the stress and stress hormones and etc. But concentrating on the food, the melon, the vegetables, the fruits, the pea, and also the chestnut can be found in this alkalizing list. You can see the illustration of the vegetables, of the fruits, and the already mentioned potato, which is high in potassium, so double purpose is the intake, but be careful with the glycemic index. Alkalizing and fiber sources at the same time are the vegetables, and as I've mentioned, the expected 7-gram daily dietary fiber intake is not easy to achieve. Or you see that the melon is not only a alkalizing, but it's also a member of the cleansing, detoxifying diet. And what is harmful, what is acidifying? The overwork, the anger, the fear, and the envy and stress similarly are not related directly to the food, but are very important because they influence the endocrine system and the immune system. But concentrating to the foods, acidifying foods are the meat, the juices, the cigarette as a consumer good, the meal, the flour, the raffinated sugar, and the alcoholic beverages. Here you see the illustration of the meat. They are excellent meat, and the beefsteak label, you see that they are very high in protein. On this steak label you can see that 22 grams of protein, but you see that high in sodium and high in phosphate. Approximately neutral foods are the mushrooms, the tomato, the soybean, the milk and dairy products, honey, and the seeds. And here you see a summarizing table, acidic alkaline food comparison chart. Eat less from the more acidic and eat more from the right values. If you have time, you can read this comparison chart. You can have it for the everyday using. But here I have taken some important PRAL values, and as you remember that the the plus values can be found which are a real load to the kidneys, like the wheat flour, like the cheese, sausages, salami, etc., and the minus excellent values, the fruits and salads, etc. Attention, please. Do not confuse the previously described total acid-base balance of the organism with the local effects which can be found in some cases. For example, a stomach acidification is the case when we get some acid hydrochloride solution or tinctura amara, or if we get appetizer for human or early weaned piglet is a case. And the rumen buffering, the opposite, when we give sodium bicarbonate into the feed mixture, this is for high concentrate fed beef, cattle, and dairy. But you see that buffering can be found also in case of human. The treatment, so-called treatment of the hangover or the GERD, the reflux syndrome. And to finish with, if you follow the food pyramid system, you at the same time eat more alkalizing and less acidifying diet. And thank you very much for your precious attention.